Some stories twist your stomach before you even understand why. Some stories force you to sit still because you know that if you move, even a little, the truth might shake you to your bones. What I am about to tell you is one of those stories. It takes place in the deep low country of South Carolina, hidden under the shadows of cypress trees and the quiet flow of the Combahee River. And for nearly 8 years, 37 enslaved women were trapped in a ritual so disturbing, so psychologically destructive, that nobody spoke of it aloud for more than a century. This is the story of Harrowfield. This is the story of the Baron. And this is the beginning of a horror that did not need chains or whips to break a human soul. Before we step inside the dark walls of that old tobacco barn, take a second. Hit subscribe right now so you never miss the next part of this 10-part series. And comment below where you are watching from. Because trust me, you will want to remember where you were sitting when this story first became real to you. Now, let us begin. Part 1. Somewhere along the cypress-lined tributaries of the Combahee River stood a plantation that most maps never named, a place swallowed by marsh, fog, and silence. The locals called it Harrowfield. It stretched across nearly 2,000 acres of rice fields, thick forests, and narrow paths worn down by hundreds of enslaved people who lived and labored there. To strangers it looked like any other prosperous estate in the Beaufort district. But to those who lived nearby, Harrowfield felt wrong. Like a house that never quite woke up. Like a place holding its breath. The story truly begins in the autumn of 1846 when a man arrived at Harrowfield claiming to be Baron Fournier. Nobody ever proved that title was real, and nobody dared question it either. He was a tall man in his 40s with sharp eyes that seemed to study everything and everyone. He spoke with a smooth, polished accent that sounded part French and part something else. He wore elegant clothes even when he walked through muddy fields. He carried himself like someone who believed the world belonged entirely to him. Before the Baron arrived, Harrowfield belonged to the Gaillard family for 3 generations. Mismanagement and debt finally forced them to sell the land. Some people whispered that the estate itself was cursed and that the Gaillards were only the first ones who felt it. Others said the land simply changed hands the way land always does. But the enslaved people living on the property knew that something far worse was coming with the new owner. Fournier brought with him a library of over 3,000 books, written in French, German, English, and other languages the overseers could not recognize. The shelves were filled with works on philosophy, punishment, mental control, the mind of the criminal, and the structure of obedience. He believed that control did not require whips or chains. Instead he believed the strongest prison was the human mind itself. His letters, some of which survive today, speak of ideas that were twisted long before he touched them. Ideas about shaping thought. Ideas about breaking communities without leaving bruises. His arrival unsettled everyone. To the white neighbors he seemed eccentric but wealthy. To the overseers he felt unpredictable. But to the enslaved community, especially the 37 women and girls over the age of 14, his presence felt like a storm quietly rolling in. These women had lived through years of cruelty long before Fournier came. They understood the brutal patterns of plantation life. They understood punishment, loss, hunger, exhaustion, and fear. But they had never seen anything like what the Baron planned. It began with small things. Odd questions. Strange observations. Forced interviews where he measured the circumference of each woman's head and wrote down notes about her character, her voice, her expressions, and her family. He wrote constantly in a thick leather journal that he locked every night in his private study. Then, 1 week after taking control of Harrowfield, he made an announcement that froze every conversation on the property. Every woman and girl above the age of 14 would attend a compulsory gathering every Sunday evening. No exceptions. No excuses. These meetings would happen in an old tobacco barn that Fournier renovated into a strange chamber with wooden benches arranged in a semicircle. Whale oil lamps hung from the rafters and cast long dark shadows that moved with every flicker of flame. No overseer was allowed inside. Only the Baron and a free woman of color named Celeste Marchant, whom he brought from Louisiana, would run these meetings. Celeste frightened people in a different way. She never raised her voice. She never smiled. She spoke softly in Creole French and carried a notebook just like the Baron. Nobody knew if she chose to follow him or if she was trapped by something unseen. The first gathering took place on Sunday, October 18, 1846. As the sun disappeared behind the live oaks and the frogs began their nightly chorus, the women walked in silence toward the barn. Their footsteps were soft in the dirt, and the only sound they heard was the steady breathing of the women beside them. Nobody knew what was waiting inside. Nobody knew that this night would begin an 8-year ritual that would hollow out their community from the inside. When they stepped into the barn, they were shocked by what they saw. The benches were cushioned. The room was clean. A small platform stood at the front of the room with a single polished chair. It looked almost like a school or a church. Almost comforting. But the comfort was an illusion, and the women sensed it instantly. Fournier stood waiting for them in a dark suit that looked completely out of place in that rural space. He greeted them politely. Too politely. He called them ladies, a word no enslaver had ever used for them. His voice was quiet, gentle, and entirely wrong. He told them they were going to play a weekly game. He told them they would vote by secret ballot for one person on the plantation. Whoever received the highest number of votes would face a consequence. He did not show anger. He did not show pleasure. He only spoke with calm authority, explaining that the true power of obedience lived in the mind, not in the body. The women listened. They understood the threat behind every soft word. They understood they were being forced into something designed to break them in a way they could not see coming. That night they cast their first votes. And when the Baron announced that Lily, a kind 53-year-old healer who helped everyone, had been chosen to suffer the first consequence, the room filled with a silence so heavy it stole the breath from every woman present. That silence was only the beginning. Part 2 is coming next. Part 2. Before we continue, imagine this for just a moment. Imagine living in a world where the people you love the most suddenly become the people you fear. Imagine waking up every Sunday knowing that by nightfall you might lose food, sleep, your work, or even your voice, all because someone you cared for wrote your name on a small piece of paper. Now imagine having to choose who among your friends will suffer next. That is the terror the women of Harrowfield lived with. And the worst part was this. The monster behind it all never raised a whip. He used only the mind. Welcome back to the story of the Harrowfield Plantation and the experiment that nearly erased an entire community of women from themselves. Part 2 begins in the middle of the slow nightmare that had already stretched on for years. The Sunday ritual had become as steady as the seasons. Rice planting, rice harvesting, and every week the game. But something darker had begun to happen inside the minds of the 37 women who played it. Women who once comforted each other through sickness and heartbreak now looked at one another with quiet suspicion. They wondered who had written their name last week. They wondered who would write it tonight. The trust that once held the community together started to break apart. Even small kindnesses became heavier. A helping hand with laundry meant something different now. A shared piece of bread meant a question. A sad glance meant fear. Some women believed they could see patterns in the voting. They developed theories about who supported who was protecting who had betrayed someone last season. These theories spread quietly and slowly. They became whispered ideas passed between women who barely spoke anymore. Some of these ideas were true. Others existed only in imagination. But it did not matter. Trust was falling apart whether the reasons were real or not. Fournier watched all of this unfold with a cold kind of satisfaction. He wrote everything down in his journal. He compared every vote with every head measurement he had taken. He compared every behavior with what he called his science. He believed he was proving something. He believed he was documenting the collapse of human loyalty under pressure. His letters, later found in an archive, showed the thinking of a man who saw human beings as pieces on a board. He was not simply cruel. He was convinced he was right. But the human spirit is never as simple as men like Fournier want it to be. Even inside this nightmare, the women began to search for ways to push back. The resistance was small, gentle, almost invisible, but it was there. Some women tried to spread the votes evenly so that no one person suffered too often. Others voted for the strongest among them because they believed those women could survive the consequences. A few wrote their own names again and again. Quiet self-sacrifice. A way to keep someone else safe just a little longer. During these years Hannah became a kind of leader without ever claiming the title. When someone suffered a consequence, she visited them. Sometimes she brought a small piece of food. Sometimes she simply sat beside them in silence. She reminded people that they were still human, still worthy of kindness. Her presence helped hold together what little hope remained. Visitors continued to come and go, always impressed with the quiet discipline of the plantation. They wrote about the silence of the women as though it were something admirable. They never understood that the silence was not obedience. It was survival. It was the only safe language left. Speaking carelessly meant giving Fournier fuel for his journal, giving him something he could twist into punishment. So the women developed another kind of language. The small movements of hands. A certain way of folding a cloth. A shared look. A light touch on the arm. These became their sentences, their comfort, their warnings. Years passed like this. New girls turned 14 and joined the game. Older women were excused because of age or illness, though no one knew if that was mercy or something worse. Even that small unknown became part of the fear. Every change in Fournier's rules brought more questions. Every shift in the group brought more confusion. But in the spring of 1852 something changed. Hannah's daughter Sarah turned 14. She was now part of the ritual. Watching her child enter the barn that first Sunday was like watching the world close around her. That night Sarah asked her mother a question. A question Hannah had never spoken aloud. Why do we not all refuse? It was a child's question but also a revolutionary one. Sarah believed that if they all acted together they could break the system. She did not understand how deeply fear had shaped the women. She did not understand how dangerous defiance was. But her question planted something new in Hannah's mind. Fournier was different from other enslavers. His power depended on the game. He needed their participation. He needed their choices. Without that, the whole structure might collapse. So Hannah began to watch him more closely. She noticed that when the votes were too evenly spread he became tense. His hands tightened. He wrote faster. His calm voice changed slightly. She noticed that his assistant, Celeste Marchant, sometimes showed tiny signs of distress. A trembling hand, a closed eye, a moment of hesitation. These details mattered because any path to disrupting the game would require more than courage. It would require understanding the weaknesses in the system and perhaps finding an ally in someone who lived both inside and outside the plantation structure. By the summer of 1852 the heat grew unbearable. Mosquitoes swarmed. The fields steamed. But beneath that oppressive heat something else was growing. The women were learning the architecture of resistance. They developed a quiet system for their votes. One week nearly everyone chose the same woman, someone strong enough to endure it. The next week they engineered an exact tie among all participants and forced Fournier to make the final choice himself. He added new rules, stricter ones. But the more rules he added, the more complicated his system became. And the more complicated it became, the more cracks appeared. By the fall of 1853 Fournier was losing control. His journal entries showed confusion. He suspected the women were resisting but could not prove it. Their actions looked like compliance but felt like rebellion. He tried to redesign the game. He announced a new rule. Instead of voting for who would suffer, they would vote for who would be rewarded. Better food, easier work, a visit with family. Only one woman would receive this gift each week and everyone else would feel its absence. But the women found a way to resist this too. Their first vote went almost entirely to Sarah. Hannah's daughter had become a symbol. A quiet voice of resistance. Fournier was forced to reward her and was left confused about their motives. Were they protecting the child? Or were they sending a message? He could not interpret the meaning. Week after week the votes formed strange patterns. Always the young women. Always those who had recently suffered. Always mothers. These patterns became messages that Fournier could sense but not understand. Meanwhile Celeste began to show signs of unraveling. A miscount. A missing ballot box. Arriving late. Forgetting her role. These mistakes were small but dangerous. Hannah watched her carefully and wondered if Celeste was becoming an ally or simply falling apart. The winter that followed brought cold wind across the rice fields. The water froze. Work slowed. Fournier spent long hours studying his notes, analyzing every detail. And during that cold season Hannah made a choice. A choice that would change the direction of everything that followed. She could not confront Fournier directly. She could not stop the game alone. But she could do something else. Part 3 will reveal what she did and how the first real step toward breaking the Baron's experiment began. If you want Part 3, just say, continue Part 3. Part 3, the first secret. Hook. There are moments in history when a whisper becomes more dangerous than a weapon. When one quiet conversation has the power to expose a monster or destroy every person involved. Tonight you are about to witness one of those moments. If you have been following this story, you already know Harrowfield was a place where silence kept people alive. But sometimes silence becomes impossible. Sometimes truth claws its way out, even if it risks everything. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss Part 4. And comment the word remember if you are still with Hannah on this journey. Now let us step back into the darkness behind the laundry house where two women prepared to change the fate of Harrowfield. Part 3. If we do not survive this, Hannah told Sarah, you will. And you will remember. You will tell what happened here. Hannah had spoken those words with steady courage, but her heart was not steady at all. She knew memory alone was not enough. Memory could be argued with. Memory could be erased. Memory from an enslaved woman could be dismissed by anyone who chose not to listen. No, she needed something stronger. Something written. Something that could sit before a judge long after she was gone. Something that could survive fire, fear, and time. She needed documents. And the only documents that mattered were the ones kept by the man who had turned Harrowfield into a living experiment. Fournier. His journals were locked inside his study. His notes were guarded. His methods were hidden behind polite language and soft threats. Nobody on the plantation ever saw the inside of those books. At least that is what Hannah believed. The truth came from a direction she never expected. It began on a warm afternoon in March of 1854. Hannah was working inside the laundry house, her arms deep in buckets of steaming water as she scrubbed linens until her fingers burned. Laundry work was endless, but it was also one of the few places where conversations could hide inside noise. The building smelled of soap and sweat and hot fabric, and the wet air made it hard to breathe. That was when Celeste Marchant stepped inside. Hannah froze. Celeste never approached anyone. Her entire role depended on staying separate, distant, and quiet. She walked through Harrowfield with the strange authority of someone who was free but trapped at the same time. A woman who answered only to the Baron. A woman who carried secrets in her posture. Her presence in the laundry meant danger for both of them. Celeste glanced over her shoulder, checking the doorway, checking the windows, checking the shadows. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. I need to speak with you. Hannah did not respond at first. She was taught not to. Speaking without permission could bring lashes or worse. But Celeste pressed on, lowering her voice even more. It is about the Sunday gatherings. That changed everything. Hannah nodded once, just enough for Celeste to see. And just like that, the two women crossed a boundary neither would ever be able to uncross. They met that night in the shadows behind the laundry house. The darkness there felt safer than any locked room. Frogs croaked from the marsh. Insects hummed and buzzed all around. The darkness was deep enough to hide two secrets. Maybe more. Celeste stood with her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold, though the night was heavy and warm. She stared into the darkness before speaking. I need to tell you something, she said. And it will not be easy to hear. Her words came slowly at first. Then faster. Then like the breaking of a dam. Celeste had once been enslaved herself in Louisiana. She had been educated by the family that owned her, a rare thing, almost unheard of. She could read and write. She could translate French. She could keep books. And that ability had drawn Fournier to her. He bought her freedom. But freedom with strings is not freedom at all. He offered her money, a position, and the promise that she would never again feel the sting of a whip. All she had to do was assist him with his work. She believed him. She believed, at first, that he wanted to create a more peaceful system of plantation control. A system that did not depend on chains or beatings. She thought the Sunday gatherings were a new method, maybe even a kinder one. But she had been wrong. Horribly wrong. As the years passed, she watched the gatherings twist the minds of the women inside that barn. She saw how each vote planted suspicion. She saw how each consequence deepened fear. She saw how women who once loved each other began looking at each other with dread, wondering who would be chosen next. The damage was invisible. That made it stronger. "You have to understand," Celeste whispered. "He is not trying to manage a plantation. He is trying to study you." The words hit Hannah like a blow. And then came the truth that mattered most. "I keep his records." Hannah stared at her. "Every vote," Celeste said. "Every consequence. Every name he writes. Every observation. Every thought he puts in that journal. I write it all. And I have made copies. Pages and pages. Enough to expose everything he has done here." The night seemed to freeze. Even the insects felt silent. Hannah could hardly breathe. For years she had believed that Fournier's journals were the only evidence of the horrors taking place inside that barn. She had thought the truth was locked away forever. But here in the moonlit darkness stood a woman who held the key to it all. "Why are you telling me?" Hannah asked. Celeste's voice trembled. "Because I cannot carry it alone anymore. And because I see what you are trying to do. You are trying to keep your world alive. I want to help you do more than survive. I want to help you leave proof." Proof. The word pulsed like a heartbeat. Celeste stepped closer. Her eyes were filled with a fear that came from years of living in a house full of quiet cruelty. "Fournier trusts me," she said. "He never suspects I would betray him. But the copies I made need to be hidden. They need to be placed somewhere he will never find. And I cannot do it alone." Hannah felt her own fear rise, but it mixed with something else. Courage. Purpose. Maybe destiny. "Show me," she said. Celeste nodded slowly. "Then come with me tomorrow," she whispered. "And I will show you everything he has tried to hide from the world." Two women. One truth. A plan that could destroy them both or finally bring the nightmare of Harrowfield into the light. The real rebellion was about to begin. Part 4 is next. Part 4, The Room of Secrets. Hook. Some doors were never meant to open. Some rooms were never meant to be entered. And some truths are so dangerous that even speaking them aloud feels like summoning something dark. In the next few minutes you will walk with Hannah into the most forbidden part of Harrowfield. A place nobody enslaved was ever meant to see. A place where the Baron kept the heart of his power. If you thought the Sunday gatherings were the worst of this story, you are not ready for what is coming next. Before we step inside that room, take a moment to subscribe. Part 5 will take this story into a place even I can barely describe. Comment the word truth if you are still with Hannah on this journey. Now breathe, and let us begin Part 4. Part 4. The morning came quietly. Mist clung to the rice fields like a veil, and the sky carried the soft gray color that comes before a storm. Hannah woke with a heaviness in her chest, the kind that comes when someone knows her life is about to change forever. She had not slept much. She kept thinking about Celeste's words. Pages and pages. Copies of every vote, every consequence, every hidden cruelty, evidence. No enslaved person in the South had ever gained access to such proof. Most plantations left no record of their worst horrors. Owners destroyed documents. Overseers lied. Survivors were silenced. And in courtrooms across the nation, the word of an enslaved woman was treated as meaningless. But Celeste had changed everything. She had created the one thing Fournier feared most. A written record. Hannah spent the morning pretending to move through her regular tasks, but her mind was racing. Every time she saw an overseer walk by, her heart thudded in her chest. Every time she looked toward the main house, she wondered what waited behind its locked doors. Celeste found her near the well. She walked with her usual slow steps, her face expressionless, her hands folded calmly in front of her. Anyone watching would think she was simply checking the grounds as she sometimes did. But Hannah noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. Celeste was afraid. "This way," Celeste murmured without looking at her. Hannah followed at a distance at first, keeping a respectful space between them. If they walked too closely, someone might ask questions. Someone might suspect something. Celeste approached the main house from the side path, the one used by house servants. She moved with quiet confidence, the confidence of someone who had been free long enough to be trusted but cautious enough to hide everything she felt. When she finally reached the back entrance, she opened the door and stepped inside without hesitation. Hannah paused. Entering the main house without permission could mean death. But Celeste turned and gave the smallest nod, her eyes urging Hannah forward. Come. The house smelled of lemon oil and smoke from the fireplace. The floors were polished smooth. Portraits of long-dead men stared down from the walls with cold expressions. Hannah kept her head low as Celeste led her through a narrow hallway, then up a staircase, then down another corridor where the air felt colder. Finally they stopped in front of a locked door. This is his study, Celeste whispered. The door was dark wood with an iron keyhole shaped like a small, open mouth. Celeste reached into the pocket of her skirt and pulled out a thin silver key. He trusts me with this, she said. He thinks I have no reason to betray him. He has no idea I have been preparing for years. Her hand trembled only once as she fit the key into the lock. The click of the turning mechanism sounded far too loud in the quiet corridor. When the door swung open, a wave of cold air drifted out. Hannah stepped inside. The room felt like a different world. Tall bookshelves covered every wall. Thick volumes filled with strange symbols and foreign languages towered above her. A large desk sat near the window, its surface covered with ink bottles, quills, and neat stacks of paper. The curtains were half drawn, letting in just enough light to cast long shadows across the floor. And there, on the desk, lay the journal. The leather cover was dark and smooth, the edges worn from years of use. It looked harmless, almost ordinary. But Hannah felt her stomach twist as she realized how much evil had been written inside that book. Celeste closed the door behind them and turned the lock. He never comes in here until evening, Celeste said. We have time, but not much. Listen carefully. Everything you see must remain in your memory unless we move the copies. Do not touch anything unless I say so. Hannah nodded. Celeste crossed the room and reached behind a row of books on the bottom shelf. Her hands moved with quick, practiced motions. She pressed her fingers against a small wooden panel hidden beneath the shelf. There was a soft click. A second panel slid open, revealing a narrow compartment that had been carved into the wall itself. Inside were pages, stacks of them, dozens, maybe hundreds, sheets covered in Celeste's handwriting. Every vote from every Sunday gathering. Names, dates, consequences, observations. Notes about fear, notes about loyalty, notes about how the women behaved under pressure, notes about how they broke. Hannah felt her breath catch. You made all of these, she whispered. Yes, Celeste said. I had to. Someone needed to keep the truth alive. Hannah reached for a page but stopped herself before touching it. Celeste removed one stack carefully and laid it on the desk. The top page was dated November 30, 1847. Hannah recognized the name written at the top. Mary Ellen. She was chosen that night. Hannah remembered the screams. She remembered the silence after. A lump rose in her throat. This is everything, Celeste said with a quiet strength. His cruelty, his method, his ideas, his calculations, and all of it written in his own hand as well as mine. Hannah looked up sharply. His hand. Celeste nodded and tapped the locked drawer beneath the desk. That is where he keeps the original journal. Hannah stared at the drawer. The air around it felt heavy. She could feel something dark inside it. A presence. A shadow. The written soul of a man who had studied suffering the way scientists study stars. We must move the copies soon, Celeste said. They cannot stay here. Not now that you know the truth. We will hide them in the woods. In a place only we can reach. If anything happens to me, you will know where they are. Hannah felt fear rise again, but she stood taller. I will help you, she said. Whatever it costs. Celeste looked at her with a mix of sorrow and admiration. Then we must work quickly. Because the storm that is coming will not wait for us. The study seemed to grow colder as the two women began their secret work. Outside, thunder rumbled far away, rolling across the fields like a warning. Hannah did not know it yet, but stepping into that study had already changed her fate. And the fate of everyone at Harrowfield. The room of secrets had finally opened. And it would not close again. Part 5 is coming next. Part 5, The Night of the Hidden Pages. Hook. Every rebellion in history begins with a single risk. One moment when fear becomes lighter than hope. Tonight you will walk with Hannah and Celeste as they take that first step. They will move through darkness with stolen knowledge pressed against their skin. They will hide evidence that could destroy a powerful man. And for the first time in years, the women of Harrowfield will feel the fragile spark of something almost forgotten. Possibility. If you are still following this story, type the word remember in the comments. And subscribe because part 6 will take you deeper into Harrowfield's secrets. Now breathe in. The night is coming. Let us begin part 5. Part 5. The storm broke at sunset. Dark clouds moved across the sky like a living thing. Lightning flickered over the rice fields, momentarily turning the flooded rows into mirrors of white fire. The wind rose fast, shaking the shutters on the main house and bending the thin pines behind the cabins. Hannah knew storms well. She knew the sound of rain on roof boards. She knew how wind moved when it carried danger. But this storm felt different. It felt as if something ancient had been awakened. Celeste had chosen this night for a reason. Storms swallowed sound. Storms hid movement. Storms made every watchman hurry inside. As the first heavy drops began to fall, Hannah slipped out of her cabin. Sarah sat up on their pallet, her eyes wide. "Is it time?" she whispered. "Not yet," Hannah said. "Stay quiet. Listen for my steps when I return." Sarah watched her mother leave with a fear she tried to hide. Hannah closed the door gently behind her. The air outside was thick and wet. The sky flashed again and thunder followed close behind. Hannah moved through the shadows between cabins until she reached the edge of the yard. She waited there for what felt like a long moment. Then Celeste appeared. She wore a shawl with a deep hood pulled over her head. Her hands were hidden beneath the cloth. She did not look like herself. She looked like a ghost passing through the storm. "You came," Celeste said in a soft voice that barely carried over the wind. "I said I would," Hannah replied. Celeste nodded. Her face looked pale even in the low light. "Follow me." They moved quickly across the back of the house. The windows glowed faintly, and for one terrifying moment Hannah saw a silhouette pass through the lamplight of the upstairs study. She froze. "He is not in there," Celeste whispered. "He is eating supper. He will not return to the study until the storm quiets. He hates thunder." Hannah exhaled and forced her legs to move. Inside the house, the servants hurried between rooms, trying to keep the rain from blowing through the shutters. No one noticed Celeste. No one saw Hannah slip into the hallway behind her. When they reached the locked study door, Celeste brought out the silver key once more. This time, her hand shook. The lightning flashed. The key slid in. The lock turned with a soft click. They stepped inside. The room was darker than before. The storm light came in bursts, illuminating the bookshelves and the desk. The hidden compartment stood open from earlier that day. The stacks of copied pages were neatly arranged on the desk, wrapped now in cloth bundles tied with twine. "Are those all of them?" Hannah whispered. "All the copies," Celeste said. "The originals stay here. For now." Hannah looked toward the drawer where Fournier kept his journal. She felt it like a presence watching her. But Celeste shook her head. "If we take the original, he will know. And if he knows, everyone will die. We take only what he believes does not exist." Celeste handed Hannah 2 bundles of pages. They were heavy, far heavier than paper should feel. "These hold 7 years, Celeste whispered. 7 years of harm, 7 years of fear, 7 years of everything he tried to hide. Hannah clutched the bundles to her chest. "We must go now," Celeste said. "The storm will not last." They slipped from the study and closed the door. As they crept down the stairs, thunder boomed overhead so loudly that Hannah jumped. Celeste caught her arm. "It is only the sky," Celeste said. "Keep moving." When they reached the back door, the wind blew it open before Celeste could unlatch it. Rain swept inside, soaking the floor in their clothes. The darkness outside was thick, full of moving shadows and bending trees. "This way," Celeste said. They ran. The storm hit them hard. Rain stung their skin. Wind pushed them sideways. Hannah held the bundles under her shawl, clutching them tightly to protect them from getting wet. Celeste pulled Hannah toward the path that led behind the old smokehouse. From there they crossed a narrow strip of field and entered the woods. The woods behind Harrowfield were dense. The branches were heavy with moss and water. Every time lightning flashed, the trees looked like twisting figures reaching out to grab them. "Where are we going?" Hannah asked. "To a place he never goes," Celeste said. "A place even the overseers fear." Lightning split the sky, exposing an opening in the trees. Hannah recognized the path. The old burial ground. No one used it anymore. It belonged to the ancestors who had died long before Fournier arrived. The ground there was uneven. The air smelled of earth and memory. The storm grew louder as they entered the clearing. Rain hammered the stones. The wind whipped through the branches above. Celeste knelt by a half-sunken grave marker. "Help me," she said. Hannah knelt beside her. Together they began to pull away the softened soil behind the stone. The ground gave easily under the rain. Soon a shallow space opened. "Put them inside," Celeste said. Hannah placed the cloth bundles into the earth. Celeste added 2 more. Then she covered them with soil, pressing it down firmly until the ground looked untouched. When it was done, the 2 women sat back, breathing hard. Rain streamed down their faces. The storm roared above them. "No one will find them here," Celeste said. "Not unless we want them to be found." Hannah felt something shift inside her. A tiny flame. A small but powerful sense of purpose. "This is only the beginning," Celeste said. Before Hannah could speak, the sound of a branch snapping echoed behind them. They turned. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing. Tall, still, watching. Thunder rolled across the sky. Hannah's heart stopped. They were not alone. And by dawn, Harrowfield would never be the same again. Part 6 is coming next. Part 6, The Witness in the Trees. Hook. Every secret has a moment when it almost dies. When a single set of eyes sees too much. When the truth that was hidden beneath the earth rises like a warning. Tonight you will discover who stood in the storm watching Hannah and Celeste. You will learn how one frightened witness became the spark that changed everything at Harrowfield. If you are still here, type the word storm in the comments. Now breathe in. The night is waiting. Let us begin part 6. Part 6. For a long moment, the storm was the only sound. The trees swayed like dark giants. The rain crashed against the earth. Hannah and Celeste stared at the figure standing at the edge of the burial ground. A flash of lightning lit his face. It was not Fournier. It was not the overseer. It was Samuel. Samuel was 16, thin, watchful, quiet. He worked in the stables and moved like someone always expecting punishment. He kept to himself and rarely spoke unless ordered to. The women knew him only as the boy who delivered water buckets on Sundays. Now he stood trembling, soaked to the bone, staring at the half-buried grave. Hannah rose slowly. "Samuel," she said, "how long have you been there?" The boy swallowed hard. His eyes darted from Hannah to Celeste and then to the ground they had just covered. "I saw you leave the house," he said. "I saw you running. I followed because I thought." He looked down, embarrassed. "I thought someone was in trouble." Celeste stepped forward. Her voice was calm but strained. "What did you see?" Samuel hesitated. He looked at the grave again. "You hid something. Papers. I saw the cloth. I did not mean to spy. I swear." Thunder rolled above them. Hannah moved closer to him. "Did anyone else see you leave?" "No." "Did you tell anyone where you were going?" "No." Hannah breathed easier but only slightly. She exchanged a look with Celeste. Samuel had seen too much, but he was not a threat. He was a boy living under the same fear they all lived under. But the truth was dangerous in the hands of anyone. She knelt in front of him so they were at the same height. "Samuel, what you saw tonight cannot be spoken of. Not to anyone, not ever. Do you understand?" He nodded quickly. His hair stuck to his forehead. His clothes clung to his skin. "I will not say a word," he whispered. "But, what are those papers? Why hide them here?" Celeste crouched beside Hannah. For the first time since the storm began, her voice warmed. "Because they tell the truth of this place. They tell what he has done to us. One day someone will need to see them." Samuel looked confused but curious. "Who?" Someone who can make it stop, Celeste said. A bolt of lightning struck a pine tree in the distance. The trunk exploded in a loud crack. Samuel jumped back in fear. Hannah grabbed his arm. We have to go. If someone notices we are gone, it will all be lost. They moved quickly through the woods, Hannah leading the way with Samuel behind her and Celeste bringing up the rear. Branches whipped their arms. Mud swallowed their steps. When they reached the cabins, the storm had begun to calm. Samuel slipped away toward the stables. Celeste returned to the main house to dry herself before the servants noticed. Hannah pushed open her cabin door. Sarah sat up waiting. You are safe, Sarah whispered in relief. Not yet, Hannah said. But the first step is done. She pulled her daughter close and let the storm fade into the night. The next morning, Harrowfield woke with a tense, strange silence. The air smelled of wet earth and burnt pine. The storm had knocked down fences and flooded the far rows of the field. Workers hurried to repair the damage. Fournier walked the yard with his journal tucked under his arm. His shoes sank slightly into the mud. His mouth was a tight line of irritation. Storms always unsettled him, but this morning he looked more alert than usual. Almost suspicious. Hannah's heart thumped as she passed him on the way to the cookhouse. She kept her head low. The hidden pages pressed on her memory like a weight. Inside the kitchen, the women whispered about the lightning, about the fallen tree, about the screams of terrified livestock. No one noticed the way Hannah kept glancing toward the door. Then the door swung open. Samuel entered. His clothes were dry, but his eyes looked troubled. He carried a stack of clean cloths for the cook, but he moved like someone carrying something heavier, something inside his mind. Hannah watched him carefully. Did he sleep? Did he speak to anyone? Could he keep a secret this large? She had no answers. Later that afternoon, Sarah found Samuel near the well. He was scrubbing buckets, his hands shaking slightly. Are you all right? Sarah asked. Samuel startled. I cannot stop thinking about last night, he whispered. Why did you hide all of that? Sarah looked around to make sure no one was near. Because one day someone needs to know what happened here, she said quietly. It might be you, or it might be someone far away. Samuel stared at her as if she had spoken something impossible. Me, Sarah nodded. You saw something that was not meant to be seen. That makes you part of it now. If this place ever falls apart, you will know why. Samuel swallowed. What if he finds out? What if he already suspects something? Sarah's heart clenched. Why do you say that? Samuel looked over his shoulder. This morning he asked where Celeste was during the storm. He asked why she had not brought him fresh ink like she usually does. He was angry. I could tell. He keeps looking at the woods. A wave of dread washed over Sarah. That night, Hannah returned from the fields exhausted. She barely had time to sit before Sarah told her everything. Hannah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. He suspects. He does not know what, but he suspects. They were out of time. Before Hannah could speak, there was a soft knock at their door. Sarah froze. Hannah stood slowly and opened it a crack. Celeste stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. He knows something happened last night, Celeste whispered. Not what, but something. He felt it. He always feels it. He asked about the storm. He asked about the burial ground. Hannah, he is circling closer. Hannah felt her chest tighten. Then we move faster, she said. We move before he does. Celeste nodded. Tomorrow night, she whispered. Meet me when the moon rises. There is something you must see. She turned and disappeared into the darkness. Hannah closed the door slowly. The storm had passed, but the danger had only begun. Part 7 is coming next. Part 7. The night the walls began to whisper. Hook. Sometimes horror does not rise from the dark. Sometimes it grows in silence, in that small space between fear and truth. And on this night, Hannah would discover that the deeper she stepped into Fournier's secrets, the more the walls around her seemed to breathe. It was the moment the plantation turned from a prison into something alive. Something watching. Something waiting. Part 7. The air felt heavier than usual when Hannah stepped out of the laundry that night. The moon hovered low behind a blanket of thin clouds, glowing like an eye half hidden. The frogs were louder too, as if warning her not to take another step. She ignored the feeling crawling across her skin because she knew every moment counted. The copies of Fournier's journals were no longer just secret pages. They were a spark that could expose everything he had done. But a spark only meant something if it survived long enough to spread into a fire. That night she was to meet Celeste and Sarah behind the old smokehouse, a place where the walls still smelled of burned wood and memories that refused to disappear. Hannah moved carefully, keeping to the shadows, listening for footsteps that did not belong to her. She had learned long ago that danger on this land rarely announced itself. It slipped in quietly, like a hand closing over a mouth before a scream could escape. When she reached the smokehouse, Sarah was already waiting. Her face looked pale in the moonlight and her hands would not stay still. Hannah understood. They were walking a thin edge. One slip and the consequences would be worse than anything the plantation had seen. Celeste arrived moments later, moving quietly, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. There was a look in her eyes that Hannah had never seen before. Not fear, not anger, something deeper, something that felt like a countdown. She told them there was a problem. Fournier had begun reviewing his past journals. He claimed it was for accuracy. Celeste knew better. He had sensed something. A missing page maybe. A shift in her behavior. A whisper overheard. Whatever it was, he had pulled the journals from their locked drawer and began reading through them one by one. "We do not have much time," Celeste whispered. "If he notices anything missing or out of order he will question me and then he will question the rest of you." Hannah felt her chest tighten. The pages they hid were still safe, but safe was temporary. Fournier was a man who trusted documents more than people. If he discovered evidence missing from his own journals he would tear the quarters apart. He would punish everyone until he found what he wanted. Sarah asked the question Hannah had been avoiding. "What do we do now?" Celeste looked at them, her expression steady in a way that made the night feel colder. "We finish what we started. We gather everything, every copy, every page, every scrap of evidence, and we move it far from here before he turns his suspicion into action." They knew exactly who could help them. Gabriel, the quiet field hand who worked in the distant plots, far from the main house. He was strong, careful, and full of questions he kept to himself. He also knew the land better than anyone. If something needed to be hidden, he would know where. So Hannah and Sarah went looking for him, walking across the field, where the earth still held the heat from the fading day. The path was darker there. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the wind. Halfway across the field the wind stopped suddenly, as if holding its breath. That was when Hannah heard it. A whisper, not a voice she recognized. Not a voice at all. It felt like the earth itself was murmuring. She froze and Sarah nearly ran into her. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. Before Hannah could answer the whispering faded. The night went silent again. A silence so complete it felt unnatural. They pushed forward until they found Gabriel near the fence line, repairing a broken post. He listened as Hannah explained what was happening. His face stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp. "You want a place to hide something," he said quietly. "Something important. Something that cannot be found." Hannah nodded. Gabriel stood, dusted the dirt from his hands, and motioned for them to follow. He led them through a path carved by years of footsteps and hidden work. The trees grew taller the deeper they went. Their branches twisted together above them, shutting out most of the light. It felt like stepping into a throat that swallowed all sound. Finally they came to an old well. It had been closed for years. People said it was cursed because of what happened there long ago, a story no one wanted to tell during daylight. The stones around the well were cracked and covered in moss. The air above it felt colder, as if the well breathed with a life of its own. "No one goes near this place," Gabriel said. "They say the dead whisper from the bottom." Hannah felt the same uneasy chill she had felt earlier. That strange whisper. That strange stillness. The land was trying to tell them something. But the well was perfect. No guard would look here. No overseer would search it. Even Fournier avoided it because it did not fit his idea of rational science. Anything tied to superstition irritated him. Sarah shivered as Gabriel pried open the old wooden cover. The smell that rose from the well carried damp earth and something else. Something metallic. Something old. Hannah forced herself not to back away. Gabriel bent down and lowered a small lantern carefully. The light flickered off the stone walls and disappeared into the darkness below. "It is deep," he murmured. "Deep enough for your papers. Deep enough for anything." Hannah held the copies in her hands, feeling their weight. Not heavy in the physical sense. Heavy because of what they meant. Evidence of cruelty. Evidence of manipulation. Evidence that could bring down a man who believed he was above judgment. "This is the only way," she said. The wind picked up again. This time the whispering returned. Quiet, faint, almost like a warning. Gabriel stepped back. Sarah squeezed Hannah's arm for reassurance. Hannah took a breath, reached forward, and slowly lowered the wrapped bundle into the well. The rope creaked softly as the weight descended. And then the whispering stopped. The air grew still again. Hannah stood there a moment, waiting for the weight in her chest to lift. It did not. Instead she felt something else. A sense that the land had accepted the pages. Or trapped them. Or perhaps simply watched. Because this night was not the end of their struggle. It was only the moment the plantation itself began to pay attention. And it would not stay silent for long. Part 8. The day the sun refused to warm the land. Hook. Some horrors hide in the night. Others wait for daylight, because daylight makes people believe they are safe. But on this day, when the sun rose over Fournier Plantation, its light felt colder than the moon. It was the first sign that something was changing. Something was waking. And Hannah felt it before anyone else. Part 8. The morning began with a strange chill that did not match the season. The sun rose slowly behind a thin sheet of clouds that looked almost bruised. Hannah felt the cold settle inside her bones the moment she stepped out of the quarters. She had expected relief after hiding the pages in the well the night before, but instead she felt watched. Not by a person, by the land itself. Sarah joined her a moment later, rubbing her arms. "It feels wrong today," she whispered. "Like the air is listening." Hannah nodded. She felt it too. Birds usually filled the morning with noise, but today even they stayed quiet. The silence stretched across the plantation like a warning. Work began as usual. The overseer shouted orders. Buckets clattered. Fires crackled under pots near the cookhouse. But everything felt slower, heavier. People kept glancing toward the trees as if something hid there. Hannah moved toward the laundry where she was expected. The building looked the same as always, yet the shadows inside seemed darker. Celeste arrived shortly after. Her face carried a tightness that told Hannah she had not slept. "He is reading again," Celeste whispered. "He barely ate breakfast. He has locked himself in his study." Hannah felt her stomach tighten. Fournier was not a man who ignored details. If he sensed even the smallest inconsistency he would follow it. And he would not stop. "Did he say anything?" Hannah asked. "Nothing. Not a word. But his eyes were different this morning. Sharper. Like he was trying to see through people." A sudden crash echoed from the yard, making all three women turn. A horse had broken free from its tether, kicking violently as if something had startled it. Two field hands struggled to calm it, but the animal refused to settle. Its eyes rolled wildly. Its nostrils flared. It looked terrified. "The horse sees something," one of the men said. Hannah watched the animal. It kept jerking its head toward the direction of the old well. A cold shiver traced her spine. Celeste whispered, "It knows something changed." Hannah wanted to ignore the thought, but she could not. Something had changed. Not only the hidden evidence. Not only Fournier's growing suspicion. Something deeper. Something in the ground. She had felt that whisper. She had heard that strange breath of wind. Something ancient had woken when the pages were lowered into the well. As the day went on, Fournier left his study only once. He walked toward the quarters with slow, controlled steps. Hannah watched from a distance as he examined the grounds, his eyes drifting from the fields, to the smokehouse, to the trees at the edge of the property. He paused near the old well path. Hannah felt her heartbeat in her throat. If he went down that path, everything would be over. But slowly, Fournier turned away. He muttered to himself, his hands clasped behind his back as he marched back toward the house. Celeste released a breath. He does not know. Not yet. Hannah wished she believed that. The silence returned. It hung around the plantation like fog. Even the workers avoided conversation. Fear moved among them quietly, like a shadow slipping behind their feet. Around noon, Sarah came rushing toward Hannah. Her face looked pale, her hands shaking. "Hannah, you need to see this," she whispered. She pulled her toward the north field. A small group of field hands had gathered, staring at something half buried in the soil. As Hannah got closer, she felt a chill crawl along her skin. There, in the middle of the freshly tilled earth, lay a journal page. Not a copy, not one of Fournier's originals. One of their hidden pages. The paper was damp, dirt clinging to the edges. It should have been deep inside the well. There was no reason it should be here. No reason it should rise through the soil like a seed pushing up to the surface. Hannah knelt and picked it up with trembling hands. It was a record of one of the Sunday gatherings. The handwriting was Celeste's. The ink was smeared, but still readable. "How did it get here?" Sarah whispered. "We tied the bundle tightly. It could not have escaped." Hannah did not answer. She did not know if she could speak. The ground felt cold beneath her feet. The earth itself seemed to pulse softly, like a heartbeat. Gabriel arrived within moments. He stared at the page and then at the ground. "No animal dug this up," he said. The soil above it was untouched. It rose from below. Hannah felt dizzy. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Celeste arrived moments later. The sight of the page made her gasp. "This should be impossible," she whispered. "The well is sealed. No one has gone near it." Hannah felt eyes on her. She looked toward the trees. A faint movement. A shadow that did not match the shape of any branch. A shape that disappeared when she blinked. She stepped back. Her voice felt small. "We need to move the pages. All of them. They cannot stay there. Something is pushing them back to us." Gabriel's expression darkened. "Then we move them tonight. Before Fournier reviews his journals again." Celeste touched Hannah's arm. "There is more. Fournier asked me a question this morning. He wanted to know if I had ever copied any of his entries." His tone was strange, as if he already knew the answer. Hannah felt her breath catch. The ground under her felt unsteady. The cold in the air grew sharper. The sun hung low in the sky, yet the light felt dimmer than usual. As if the day itself refused to shine fully. Sarah whispered, "It is like the land is alive. Like it wants us to finish what we started. Or like it wants something else entirely." A distant sound drifted across the field. Not a bird, not a human voice. A faint, echoing murmur that rose and fell like breath. Hannah felt her heart pounding. She looked at the page in her hand. The ink shimmered slightly, catching the strange light. Celeste whispered, "The land knows, and it wants the truth exposed." Hannah closed her eyes for a moment. Tonight they would return to the well. But the well was no longer just a hiding place. It was something else. Something awake. Something hungry. And it was waiting for them. Part 9. The well that whispered back. Hook. Some secrets grow heavier the longer they stay buried. Others claw their way back to the surface, refusing to stay hidden. On this night, Hannah would finally return to the well where they hid the pages. But the well was no longer just a place of secrecy. It had become something that breathed. Something that whispered. Something that wanted more than truth. Part 9. Night fell fast, as if the sky itself wanted to hurry darkness along. Hannah watched the last sliver of sunlight disappear behind the trees. The air felt cold even though it was spring. The insects that usually filled the night with noise stayed silent. There was no comfort in the stillness. It felt like the world held its breath. Sarah stood beside her, hugging herself tightly. She kept glancing toward the woods. The shadows between the trees were unnaturally thick, as if they moved when no one watched. Gabriel arrived a few minutes later, carrying a small lantern that flickered weakly, like a candle in a storm. Celeste came last. Her face looked pale and strained. She had been forced to spend most of the day near Fournier, pretending to work while he questioned her with calm, cold suspicion. Every question had been another thread pulled from the fabric of their plan. Every look from him felt like a searchlight. But Celeste did not break. Now she stood with them, ready to finish what they had started. Hannah took a deep breath. "We move the pages tonight," she said. "Before he notices anything missing. Before the land brings up more of them." They walked together toward the old well. The path seemed longer than before. Every footstep echoed too loudly. The trees leaned closer, their branches curling like fingers reaching for them. As they reached the clearing, the well stood in the center like a dark mouth waiting for a voice to speak into it. The air around it felt colder than the rest of the night. Hannah felt her skin prickle. It was the same sensation she had felt when she first heard that whisper in the field. A soft sound, a breath, a presence. Gabriel approached the well and set the lantern down. Its flickering light cast long shadows across the stones. The wooden cover had been replaced, but it looked slightly crooked, as if something had pushed against it from below. Celeste stepped closer. "We need to open it. Quickly." And we worked together. Gabriel lifted the cover. As soon as he did, a rush of cold air poured out of the well. Not a normal cold, a deep cold that felt older than the plantation itself. The kind that made bones ache and breath freeze. Sarah gasped. "It is like winter down there." Hannah felt the air brushing her face. The whisper was back, soft, almost like a voice trying to form words. She leaned closer. For a moment, she thought she heard her own name. Gabriel lowered the lantern into the well. The light swung gently, showing the stone walls covered in damp moss. The rope they had used the night before was still tied inside. But something was different. The rope had moved. It was no longer hanging straight. It clung to the wall, as if pulled sideways by something unseen. The bundle that held the pages was no longer at the bottom. It was halfway up the well wall, pressed into the stone like something had carried it there. Hannah felt her heart pound. Celeste spoke quietly. "The land is trying to return them to us. It does not want them hidden." Gabriel reached for the rope. As he pulled, the whisper grew louder. Hannah felt the sound vibrate in her chest. It did not feel like danger. It felt like pleading, like something wanting to be heard. He pulled the bundle free and lifted it out. The pages were damp, but intact. Hannah took them gently. They felt heavier than before. Not physically, emotionally, spiritually, as if they carried the weight of every story buried on the plantation. Sarah whispered, "Where do we take them now?" Gabriel did not answer at first. He stared into the trees. Then he spoke with a low voice. "There is a place deeper in the woods. A place the overseers never go. Even the oldest workers avoid it. They say it is where the ground remembers things it should not remember." Celeste frowned. "And you want us to go there?" Gabriel nodded. "If something wants these pages brought to the surface, then we need to take them to the one place where nothing stays silent. The one place where the truth cannot hide." Hannah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. But she knew Gabriel was right. The plantation was reacting. The land was reacting. They could not leave the pages where they were. Fournier was too close. And the land itself seemed determined to push the secrets into the open. "We go now," Hannah said. They began walking toward the deeper woods. The path was narrow and winding. The branches of the trees seemed to shift overhead, letting in slivers of moonlight that looked like pale veins across the ground. The deeper they walked, the heavier the air became. The whispering followed them, soft and steady, like an invisible presence keeping pace behind their steps. Sarah clung close to Hannah. Every few steps she looked behind them. Hannah did not. She did not want to see what she felt was following them. After what felt like an hour, they reached a wide clearing. The ground was uneven, broken by roots that twisted across the earth like veins. At the center of the clearing stood an enormous oak tree with a trunk so wide it seemed impossible for human hands to wrap around it. The bark looked ancient, older than any structure on the plantation. Gabriel pointed. "Here." Hannah approached the tree. The air around it felt different. Heavy, charged. The whispering grew louder, not from the well this time, but from the ground itself. Celeste stepped forward. "This is where we give the truth a place to breathe." They dug into the soft earth beneath the tree's roots. The soil felt warm, as if something below pulsed with its own heartbeat. When the hole was deep enough, Hannah placed the bundle inside. The moment it touched the earth, the whisper stopped. Silence fell. Not an empty silence. A full silence. A silence that felt like acceptance. They covered the pages with soil. The roots seemed to shift slightly, as if closing protectively around the truth. Sarah whispered, "It feels alive." Hannah nodded. She could feel it too. The land had taken the pages. This time fully, Completely. The truth was no longer hidden. It was planted. Gabriel straightened. Now we wait. Celeste's voice trembled. For what? Gabriel looked back toward the plantation, where distant lanterns flickered like restless eyes. For the moment the truth comes back up, he said. And when it does, nothing will be the same. Hannah felt the wind rise again. It brushed past her ears, carrying a faint murmur that seemed almost like words. Something has begun, and it will not stop now. Part 10. The secrets that refused to stay buried. Hook. Some stories cannot stay hidden. Some truths claw their way into the light no matter how deep they are buried. Tonight, after years of fear, silence, and whispered secrets, Hannah and Sarah finally face the moment that will change everything. The Harrowfield Plantation will never be the same, and neither will they. Part 10. The forest was quiet as Hannah, Sarah, Celeste, and Gabriel approached the great oak tree. Moonlight poured over the clearing, illuminating the roots that twisted like veins across the ground. The wind carried a faint murmur, almost like the echo of voices from the plantation. They could feel the weight of the past pressing down on them. For years, they had carried fear in every step. The Sunday gatherings, the silent votes, the psychological games that had turned women against each other. They had survived because they learned to read each other without words, to support each other in the smallest ways, and to carry the truth in secret. Now, at last, the moment to release that truth had arrived. Hannah knelt at the base of the oak. The soil felt warm, as if the earth itself had been waiting for this night. She brushed away the top layer, revealing the bundle of journal copies wrapped in cloth. Each page contained evidence of Fournier's cruelty, meticulous observations of the women, and the names of those who had suffered week after week. Each line screamed what words could never capture: the quiet horror of living under a man who weaponized the mind instead of the whip. Celeste took a deep breath. "We have to leave them here," she said. "The earth will protect them until someone who can act comes along." Gabriel nodded. "The place is sacred. What is buried here will outlast Fournier, the plantation, and all who tried to silence it." Sarah hesitated. "But what if no one finds them?" she asked softly. "What if the truth stays buried forever?" Hannah looked at her daughter, feeling the weight of all the years they had endured. "That is why we must survive," she said. "We carry it with us, and someday someone will hear." They covered the bundle with earth, pressing the soil firmly around the roots. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the wind rose, rustling leaves and sending branches swaying above them. It felt like the land itself was whispering approval, a quiet acknowledgement that the stories of Harrowfield were now anchored somewhere they could never be erased. As they turned to leave, Hannah felt a presence behind her. Not human, not threatening, but watchful. She glanced back at the oak and swore she could see a faint shimmer along the roots, as if the pages themselves were alive beneath the soil. The walk back to the quarters was tense. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound carried a weight that made their hearts race. But there was also a strange relief, a sense that for the first time, the story they carried would no longer depend solely on their silence. Fournier, of course, had no knowledge of what had just happened. He prowled the plantation in his study, muttering about voting patterns, moral behavior, and inefficiencies he thought he had detected. But something had changed that he could not measure or control. The subtle resistance of the women, the clever manipulations, the quiet acts of care and courage, these had built a force he could not contain. Hannah watched him from the shadows of the quarters. The man who had once controlled her life through fear now seemed small, fragile. His power had always depended on her silence, on the complicity of others, on the careful manipulation of mind and trust. But silence had ended, complicity had fractured, and manipulation could not survive the truth. Days passed, and life on the plantation continued. The rice fields were worked, meals prepared, and the Sunday gatherings went on, but something was different. The women of Harrowfield moved with a quiet purpose. Their glances carried messages. Their gestures spoke volumes. Hannah had begun teaching Sarah the small languages of survival and resistance, the ways to carry truth in silence until it could be shared. Celeste, finally free from her role as an assistant to Fournier, began to guide them in documenting what had been hidden for so long. She helped them organize the memories, the observations, the experiences of every woman who had endured the game. Together, they built a record that no lash, no punishment, no manipulation could ever erase. Months later, word of a mysterious package buried under an old oak in the northern woods reached historians and abolitionists passing through the South. The pages they had buried began to surface in letters, in stories told to sympathetic allies, and in whispers that crossed state lines. The world began to understand the depth of the cruelty at Harrowfield and the incredible courage of those who survived it. Hannah lived to see the change she had longed for. She watched her daughter, now older, tell the story to anyone who would listen. She saw the courage ripple outward, the fear replaced by remembrance. Fournier died without ever fully understanding what had been taken from him. Not just the journals, not just the power, but the narrative itself. The women had reclaimed it. In the years after, the Harrowfield estate fell into ruin. The fields were abandoned, the main house crumbled, and the land reclaimed what it had witnessed for so long. Yet the oak remained, its roots holding the pages and memories like a heartbeat frozen in time. And when the wind rustled through its branches, those who listened closely could hear whispers of what had been endured, what had been survived, and what could never be silenced again. Hannah knew the story was bigger than herself, bigger than the plantation, bigger than the horrors of any man. The story had become a legacy. And through it, the voices of those who had been forced into silence now spoke louder than anyone could have imagined. She held Sarah's hand and whispered, "If we don't survive, you will. But remember, even if we do, never forget. Tell the world, tell everyone, and make sure they listen." The night fell, calm for the first time in years. But the forest kept its watch. The whispers remained beneath the roots. The truth had finally found a home. And the story of Harrowfield, of Baron Fournier, of the women who refused to break completely, would echo across generations. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to subscribe for more historic horror and mystery. Share this video with friends who love hidden stories and untold history. And leave a comment below telling us what part of Harrowfield's story shocked you the most or what you would have done in Hannah's place.